You ever have one of those mornings where everything feels perfectly ordinary, so much so that you don't even realize chaos is lurking just around the corner? That was me. I was sitting on my porch, coffee steaming in my favorite mug, watching the quiet suburban streets stretch out in front of me. It was one of those deceptively calm mornings where you expect the day to unfold without a hitch. I couldn't have been more wrong. Out of nowhere, a teenage boy, maybe 16 at best, strolled right up my driveway, as if he owned the place. He stopped in front of my Harley, pointed at it with all the entitlement in the world, and said in the most casual tone you can imagine, "I'll take that one." It was as if he were ordering a sandwich at a deli, not pointing at a piece of machinery I'd poured 12 years of sweat, money, and pride into. At first, I thought it had to be a joke. I actually laughed. But the kid's face didn't crack so much as a smirk. He just crossed his arms and repeated himself with complete seriousness. "I'm not kidding. Mom said you'd give it to me. She already talked to the HOA about it." I blinked, my hand frozen halfway to my mug. "Excuse me?" He nodded confidently toward the cul-de-sac, and that's when I saw her, Karen, the self-proclaimed queen of our HOA. She was standing there with her trademark oversized sunglasses and arms crossed, radiating smugness like she was about to auction off my possessions. She even had the audacity to wave at me like we were good friends sharing a laugh. I set my coffee down and turned back to the boy. "You must be confused," I told him, still trying to wrap my head around what I was hearing. But he huffed and doubled down. "She said you don't even ride it anymore, and the noise bothers everyone, so you might as well give it to me." That was the breaking point. Let me make one thing clear. I do ride that Harley every single weekend. I've had it for more than a decade, customized every inch myself, and to me it isn't just a motorcycle, it's a piece of my identity. Nobody, especially not some entitled HOA tyrant or her bratty kid, was going to take it from me. I marched down the porch and headed straight for Karen, who by this point had sauntered onto my lawn like she was inspecting property she already owned. "What is this?" I asked, my voice flat with disbelief. She didn't even blink. "That motorcycle is an eyesore, and your engine's loud enough to rattle the neighbor's windows. The board agreed. You should donate it to someone who'd appreciate it." She tipped her chin toward her son. "Like him." My jaw dropped. "You've lost your mind," I laughed, but her expression hardened instantly. "Fine," she hissed. "If you won't be neighborly, I'll escalate this." I didn't know then what she meant, but I was about to find out in the most dramatic way possible. The very next Saturday, after a blissful morning ride with the wind on my face and the Harley humming like the masterpiece it was, I pulled back into my driveway and parked it under the oak tree beside my garage, as I always did. I hadn't even taken off my helmet when the wail of sirens tore down the street. 2 police cruisers screeched to a halt in front of my house like they were busting up a drug ring. Doors swung open and out stepped 2 officers, hands resting ominously close to their holsters. "Sir, step away from the motorcycle," one of them barked. I blinked in disbelief. "Excuse me? Step away from the vehicle now." I backed up, confused but compliant, raising my hand slightly. "Officers, is there a problem?" One of them flipped open a notepad. "We received a report of stolen property on site. A local resident claims you unlawfully took possession of a motorcycle belonging to her minor son." I swear you could have knocked me over with a feather. Before I could even process that madness, Karen came strutting across the street, her son trailing behind her with his arms crossed like he'd been wronged by the universe. She jabbed her finger toward my Harley and practically shouted, "That's the one! He promised to give it to my son and then backed out. That's theft, isn't it?" I laughed because it had to be a prank, but the officer didn't laugh. "Do you have proof of ownership?" he asked sternly. "Yes," I said quickly. "The title and registration are inside." I made to walk toward the house, but one of the officers held up his hand. "Stay where you are. We'll retrieve it. Just tell us where the papers are." While they went inside with my permission, Karen leaned close enough for me to smell her perfume and whispered with a poisonous grin, "You could have just done the right thing. Now the whole neighborhood will see the kind of man you are." Every ounce of me wanted to explode, but I stayed calm. Within minutes, the officers emerged, holding my registration and title. "It's his," one of them confirmed, sounding irritated. "Clean title, been in his name for years." Karen's smug grin vanished, her son's face twisted into a scowl. "This isn't fair," he shouted. "I said I could have it." "I said no such thing," I snapped, my patience gone. Karen, scrambling, tried a new angle. "Well, maybe he didn't steal it, but he lied to us. That's fraud." Even the cops looked done by then. They handed my papers back, told me to have a good day, and drove off without so much as a warning. You'd think that would be the end of it, but Karen wasn't finished. 3 days later, I found a notice taped to my front door from the HOA. Violation, community disruption, noise nuisance, and failure to comply with neighborhood courtesy standards. In other words, Karen had filed a formal complaint through the board. According to her, my Harley was disturbing the peace, I had made false promises to transfer it, and my hostile attitude had created a toxic environment. At that point, it was no longer laughable, it was harassment, plain and simple. So I made a call, not to the HOA, and certainly not to Karen, but to Mark, an old acquaintance who worked in the state attorney's office. We'd served in the same veterans group a few years back, and if anyone would take me seriously, it was him. I explained everything, from the boy's first attempt to claim my bike, to the bogus police stunt, to this new HOA attack. Mark didn't hesitate. "This sounds like she's weaponizing the HOA to force a transfer of private property. That's not just harassment, that could be considered civil coercion." That word stuck with me, civil coercion. Mark told me to put everything together, written statement, documentation, photos, copies of the HOA notice, even security footage. Fortunately, my doorbell cam had caught the boy pointing at my Harley and saying, "Mom said you'd give it to me." That was my ace. By the time I walked into the state attorney's office with a folder so thick it barely closed, I felt like I was marching in with an arsenal. Later that week, Mark called me back with news. Apparently, Karen had also filed a complaint there, claiming I had manipulated her son with false promises. But thanks to my evidence, the tables had turned. She wasn't just making noise anymore, she was under scrutiny. The HOA meeting was set for Thursday. Normally, I wouldn't waste an evening on that nonsense, but this time was different. I arrived early, dressed sharply, folder in hand, calm but ready. Karen was already there, holding court like some suburban queen, her son sulking beside her. When she saw me, she rolled her eyes. "Oh, you decided to show," I said with a calm smile. "Wouldn't miss it." When the meeting began, the president, Bill, called for new business. Karen shot her hand up like a student desperate to be called on. She launched into a tirade about how I had misled her son, broken a verbal commitment, created hostility, and shown erratic behavior. She even tried to suggest I wasn't mentally stable, which earned her a few uncomfortable looks from the board. She went on, painting herself as the victim, until finally Bill turned to me. I stood, placed my folder on the table, and opened it. "First of all, I never promised your child anything," I said firmly. Then I pulled out the printed images from the doorbell footage, the police report confirming no wrongdoing, and even a letter from the state attorney's office acknowledging Karen's false claims. I passed everything around. The room went dead silent. Karen's face drained of color. Bill cleared his throat and said, "We were not aware of these details. It appears this may have been an abuse of the HOA complaint process." He shut Karen down so fast, even she couldn't squeeze in another word. But Karen, true to her form, had one last card to play. Days later, I received a letter from a law firm. Inside was a cease and desist order claiming I had emotionally misled her minor son and caused them distress. It demanded I either surrender the Harley or face civil action. It might have been laughable, except it was real. She had actually hired a lawyer. But here's the thing. When I read it to Mark, he chuckled. "She's bluffing. If she pushes this, she's opening herself up to liability. With your evidence, she could be the one facing legal trouble." So, with Mark's help and a veteran buddy who worked as an attorney, we drafted a formal rebuttal. Not only did we tear apart her accusations with evidence, we also issued a counter notice warning of harassment charges if she continued. That was the final straw. Karen went silent. No more smug waves, no letters, no police. It was like she'd been deflated, all her power gone. But the neighborhood wasn't silent. Word spread fast. Turns out I wasn't the only one she'd bullied. People came forward with their own stories, how she'd harassed them about paint colors, lawn heights, dogs, even service animals. For years, everyone had been too tired or too intimidated to push back. Now they had a spark, and they rallied. At the next HOA meeting, a petition was introduced, signed by over half the community, to remove Karen from the board for harassment and misuse of authority. She didn't even bother showing up. The vote passed, she was gone. And me? I still have my Harley, still park it under the oak tree, still take it out every weekend, but now, when I rev the engine, nobody complains, because the woman who tried to strip me of my bike, my pride, and my peace ended up losing everything.